This week on Supercars Talk, Renee Gracie has given up on her Bathurst dream, Shane Van Gisbergen says he's staying in the category for next year, and I try to tackle the parity problem. More on the parity problem later, but the big news this week is that Robbie Mayer, you may remember her from engineering the just super cheap wildcard the last couple of years at Bathurst. She's been with Triple Eight for a very long time as a data engineer and then race engineer. She's going over to Premier Racing to bolster their engineering lineup. As far as I know, Tim Slade has been running most of the year with different engineers and kind of a fly-in, fly-out basis. He hasn't had a permanent engineer there. So I can assume that she'll be slotting in there, but nothing was said on the press release what is happening exactly. Another WTF type story came out this week where Supercars is looking to buy 2 of the franchises back. Yes, that's right. They want to reduce the field down to 24 cars. So the current 25 minus 2 plus 1 for the Blanchards to expand to 2 teams. Makes perfect sense to me. International travel they're talking about. So currently we don't do any international travel. Obviously New Zealand, they go on the ship over to Tasmania, so that doesn't matter. I think they're talking about fitting onto a plane, and I think 24 is the perfect number to fit onto one of those 787 jumbo jets, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a plane aficionado, but as I understand, it is a lot easier. 24 was the perfect number for shipping overseas. My solution to this, we've done this before when we had 32 cars in the field back in the early days of going over to New Zealand. You go, right, the top 24 in the championship are the ones that go to the international events, or if you want to set it out at the start of the year, you have like an IndyCar Leaders Circle kind of thing. The top 24 from the previous year, they're the ones who get those slots in the international field. Obviously, we did see some wrangling back in the day where maybe a third or fourth car from a team didn't quite get the call up because of the owner's points in the way the whole thing was structured, and you saw some odd people in odd cars. Off the top of my head, I think the Perkins did it one year with, I think Paul Dumbrell got shuffled out for someone going across New Zealand. Does anybody else remember that? I'm sure there was more cases of it, but where, people had come in and different cars had points from the previous year where people had swapped teams and things like that. Yes, there'll be special circumstances like that, but it does create a talking point, and that is a solution rather than getting rid of cars, because then it just makes it harder to build the field. And that would tie in with my idea of allowing more and more wildcards into the field where you don't necessarily have to have the license, where you can just turn up and do the races that you want to, but the guys to get into that top 24 or whatever, you have to have your license. So even maybe the top 20 have a license, and then there's 4 spots for that kind of international expansion. Your top 20 or whatever get your prize money and things like that, and it actually makes it a thing rather than. None of the teams are doing a bad job, but there's some that maybe, if they had the pressure on them to get better results to earn their income at the end of the year from Supercars, that maybe some of the pilots would be changed and maybe there would be more effort put into those cars. Let's just leave it at that. But yeah, are you on board for, once again, all I seem to talk about is wanting more cars in the field each week, and yet somehow we're at this point where they're talking about bringing it back down again. What would be your solution if, say, we are only going to take 24 cars overseas? Is that what you want to see, or would you prefer to see some kind of, have you got a better solution than my kind of free-for-all wildcard kind of thing once you're over that 24? And then also, who would you pick to get cut out of the field? One would assume, one of the things was, it makes sense to take 2 cars away from either Brad Jones Racing or Tickford, with them being a 4-car team. One of the suggestions was to take 1 car away from each, but then you've kind of got the problem what we've got with Blanchard at the moment running around with the 1 car, that then you've essentially got the 2 1-car teams. Yes, they do go and share the pit boom and rah-rah, but it does make it a little bit awkward. And then also, are you taking the Brad Jones license, or are you taking the Smith license away from that team as well? That's another question that needs to be answered. But yeah, down in the comments, let me know your thoughts on that one. The other little thing before Parity is that John McClellan has sold his share in ARG. Who is he? Well, he was an ARG shareholder, which now, that leaves 95% owned by the Rogers. Gaz and Baz basically out on their own. James Warburton still owns his 5%. Yeah, it seems strange. They've got this conglomerate. That was still wrong. I'm not going to try a third time. They had this group of people owning the series, and now they're essentially down to 1. Yeah, ARG, what's going on there? Parity. The P word that I have been trying to avoid, because it is an argument you cannot win. Even if you use stats and figures and try and stay as balanced as possible on this topic, you cannot win, because either way, you skinny cat, someone's going to tell you you're skinning it wrong. So anyway, the Parity review process has been triggered. From what I understand, this has been something that's been kicking around for a very long time, since the great old days of Parity. I'm trying to, as well, people very much focus on, oh, it's only my team that's ever, or, you know, my side's the only one that's ever been affected. I recall back in '93, the Commodores were at a disadvantage. They got a gurney flap on the wings and went and won the endurance races that year. So the Fords the next year got little winglets on the front bar to even it out. And then '95 was found, I think it was '95, it was found Fords were running those shotgun panels. So they were running lightened chassis and panels and windscreens and that to get the cars under the weight limit to run more ballast. The solution to that was then everyone had to run a bit more weight, I think, to bring everything up to speed, while there was still some of the Ford chassis running around with that the extra ballast in there. Then we had the VT and the AU. That was a bit of a disaster where they were chopping, well, the VS also had the under tray chopped out of it because it was too competitive. The VT, I think that had the under tray chopped out of it as well. And then the AU ended up getting the VT front bar. Going on, Project Blueprint started, which was basically the BA had a better suspension setup, so the VY got the same suspension setup as the BA in it, so that they both had all the same pickup points, things like that. The Chev engine got changed over, so it was more in line with the Ford unit. Yeah, just, it's happened all the way through. Parity is definitely not a new thing. There's, as sides have chopped and changed all the way through. I think the issue with it this year is that the cars technically are probably the closest that they've ever been, but once again, if you're back in the VP days, VP EB days, you're racing around there. There's, you know, 5, 6, 7 competitive cars. So if you're, you know, a 10th off the pace, you're maybe on the second row of the grid. Nowadays, you're a 10th off the pace, you might be down in 15th position. That's the hard thing. And then if there is a slight imbalance on the Mustang somewhere to the Camaro, then that 10th of a second all of a sudden chucks you right down the back of the grid the whole time. I think what's been hard for people to process is that you do get those outlier results, like, you know, Cam getting pole and then kind of, you know, he wasn't driving away like some people have said, but he had the lead at Hidden Valley. he was looking kind of Cam Watersy comfortable in that lead. Yeah, that's where you get those out where everything kind of falls together, and then you get the argument saying, well, there's obviously an imbalance if someone like Jack LeBroc's winning. Well, they've still got to beat all of the Camaro teams, which in the past as well, if one side has had an advantage, yeah, you don't just straight out get wins spread out between, like, you know, say back in the VT days, it was basically HRT and Perkins doing all of the winning. It's not like you saw the, I'm trying to think of a team that you kind of compare to Matt Stone Racing back then, but you didn't see, you know, those kind of more privateer teams going and doing any winning back in the day. Now, I did a little bit of statisticking. There's my bit of paper, a bit of hard to read there, but I did some counting because a lot of people have brought up the podiums this year, that it's been a very one-sided affair, and I'd hate to tell you, when you the figures are slightly damning, I will say that. Currently, 15 races into the season, we have 84% of the podiums have gone to the Camaro, so 16% to the Mustang. Yeah, they're big numbers there. In 2019, the year that the Mustang dominated with Scott McLaughlin, the figures were actually 67% of the podiums to Ford and 31% of the podiums to the Commodore there. And I did a little bit of digging, because I'm always hard on this one, because everyone says, you know, like, oh, that was a Ford domination when the GT3 Mustang came in. Domination, rah, rah. Yeah, so the figures are more damning this year, but if you take away the Scott McLaughlin factor, and this is even leaving Fabian in podium-wise, the stats, I forgot to mention as well, back in 2019, one podium there for Jaime, so 2% of the podiums went to the Altima. If you take Scott McLaughlin out of the equation, now this is obviously a hard one, because you'd have to put someone else in that car, but it's not like Fabs would have then gone and won every race. He would have done better than what he was doing, but yeah, for simplicity's sake, you take Scott McLaughlin out of it, and 52% of the podiums went to Mustangs, 46% to Commodores, and 2% to Altimas then. So you take Scott McLaughlin out of that, who, as love him or hate him or whatever, he's gone to IndyCar and he's getting results there. He is a freak of nature. Like, Shane Van Gisbergen is very good. I'd put Scott McLaughlin, like, Shane's very good. Scott's just that next kind of level, I think. The way he's been able to go and do that, yeah, it makes the results very, very even. A quick look last year, where we had Shane Van Gisbergen domination last year. After the first, and that's also 2019, that's taking results from the first 16 races up to the end of Hidden Valley. If we look at 2022, first 15 races, which takes us to the end of Winton, Hidden Valley was the next round. I thought that was more even, trying to, you know, take the first half of the season, really. 2022, we had 44% of the podiums went to Commodores, 56% to the Mustangs, and then you take away the Shane Van Gisbergen factor, and this one's a little bit more damning. 73% of the podiums then went to a Mustang, with only 27% going to the Commodore. So if you 2019 take away Scott McLaughlin, all of a sudden, were those two cars equal at the start of 2019? Especially then, once the Commodore got its updates, 888 went on a tear, and granted, okay, Scott won Bathurst. Let's not get into that one today, because that's a whole can of worms that gets opened anytime you mention 2019 Bathurst. But after that, 888 went on a tear and won every other race for the end of the season. So yeah, while 2019, you take away the Scott McLaughlin factor, and all of a sudden it seems very even. Last year, you take away the Shane Van Gisbergen factor, and all of a sudden, you've got a very lopsided championship under those conditions. And that's also why I was actually predicting at the start of this year, because last year, Chaz at this point was the second most successful Commodore driver. With Walkinshaws going over to Ford, I kind of predicted this year was going to be a bit of a whitewash in Ford's direction, going off the form guide from last year, because really you'd taken away, the second best kind of General Motors team, and now it is very one-sided this year. Could be a tiny little change that brings everything level. Doesn't seem to be as engine related now. They talk about yaw as the car's kind of going through the corner and that. I think the problem is they don't exactly know why it's that little bit slower, and it's a tiny little bit. Could be, maybe add a millimetre to the gurney flap on the back or something, and then all of a sudden it seems very even. It's a very hard thing. I've been trying to rack my brain in ways of actually testing this, and the best thing I thought, Supercars has got 2 mules that they can go out there and test things on, but if you could get 2 honest teams, which this is a very difficult thing to do, but say you get Erebus and Brody and they go out and they chuck their setup into the Mustang Mule, and then you get, I'm trying to think, say Cam Waters, who's probably the best performing Mustang at the moment, you get him and the Tickford team and they put their setup into the Camaro Mule, and then they drive each car, basically over a day and try and see. The hard thing is then you get Brody getting out and going, this Mustang's a bullet kind of thing. I could go faster than this if it was, and then Cam gets out of the Camaro and goes, it's quite obvious. We need, 10 tonne more downforce through the corners. That's the very hard thing that you can't just go and get even like a Lowndes or someone like that who's a bit out of it. You'd really need to get an independent, but then they haven't been spending all year in the cars and they wouldn't notice the obvious differences. Or maybe you cycle through quite a few of the top drivers. Obviously the hard thing is that Erebus probably wouldn't want to put their setup into the car and then get Shane driving and then going, they're a bit softer in the rear or something. How about we try that? That's where some of the difficulties arise with things like that. But so far, that's the best solution I've come up with. Obviously, there is the idea, like send the cars over somewhere in America where they've got a full-size wind tunnel. I would have thought that we could have done a lot of that kind of stuff with CFD now. I'm not an aerodynamicist, so I don't know everything, but I would have thought you can correlate the way they do in F1 with the CFD with what answers we're now getting on the track. So it's a tough one. There is obviously there's an imbalance in there as we look at previous years and things like that. Something needs to be done. It won't be a massive change. It's not going to be like what we've seen in the past where people are getting 200 mil cut out of under trays or adding 5 mil gurney flaps and things like that. It's not going to be a massive change that all of a sudden makes a huge difference on these cars, and something needs to happen sooner rather than later. But I wouldn't be surprised if this does still take another couple of months before they really find what's causing the problem, because the last thing we want to really see is that they make a change and then all of a sudden there's 10 Mustangs up the front, which clearly some of those guys haven't been doing as good a job as others, because Cam has somehow still been able to get that car towards the front while most of the other guys have been struggling. So anyway, that's the parity thing. Go nuts down in the comments. I know I am not going to win this battle, and there's people either way that are going to love and hate my comments, but I've copped a lot of flack for not really covering it over the last few weeks, but I don't understand where they're missing out on, so it's very hard for me to comment on what I think it is, but yes, there probably is an imbalance in there. So yeah, that's it for me this week. Let's have some fun down in the comments. I do want to hear from all of you, good and bad. I do read all of the comments and I do try and comment back. But until next time, I'm still Dave and I'll catch you later.